Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Bulldog TED Talk. This episode is going to highlight the growing issues amongst the field of emergency medicine and emergency response.
Being bold means rising up. So actions in the game, or in today's extended classroom, nurture the critical thinking skills, the disciplines that go beyond the scoreboard or academic rankings to impact the industries and neighborhoods of a community. That's the purpose that binds us. When academics and athletics rise together, the sky's the limit.
What did you say happened, sir?
I killed somebody.
Okay, what's your name?
Aldrich.
Okay, sir, why did you kill somebody?
Because I felt like it.
You felt like it, okay. Who did you kill?
My mom.
Your mother?
Yes.
With that, the horror on Morgan Drive in Franklin County began to unfold in public. Oliver Funes Machado telling the dispatcher that his mother was dead in the kitchen.
Are you sure that your mother's dead? Have you checked to see if she's breathing?
Hold on, let me check. She's dead.
She is dead? Okay. What was she doing? Did she make you mad, or what happened?
The dispatcher asked Funes Machado why he did it. He tells her, because I felt like it.
What did you do with the knife? Where is it at?
It's in their mouth.
Do you know how many times you stabbed her?
Like 8 times.
Oh, mercy.
How many of you have ever had to dial 911? Chances are, not very many of you. I, myself, have had that experience. It was a very unfortunate and a very exhilarating experience, to tell you the truth. I was sitting at the San Diego airport. I was waiting for my connection flight, getting ready to go visit my grandparents in Florida, and I got a little bored, kind of waiting in the terminal. There's always the rush and bustle of the travelers, and this particular day it was spring break, so there were basically every chair was taken up. There was an empty chair over in the corner next to looked like a really sick individual who was coughing and sneezing his brains out in the chair. So I decided to get up and take a walk around. I was walking through those Hudson newsstands that seem to pop up every 100 yards in pretty much every airport in America, and got bored of reading all the titles on each book, and so I decided to leave that area and walk down the terminal a little bit more. I passed this elderly woman. She was probably about mid-70s, almost low 80s, and she was standing outside of the women's restroom. She was holding her bag off to her side, and I looked at her, and she made eye contact with me, and I nodded my head and said, "Good morning." And then it was almost like it couldn't have been more coincidental. I saw this like glossy haze come over her eyes, and then all of a sudden she fell forward, and there was no reaction time on my part. I had no time to catch her. She fell face first, hit the concrete. I went over to her. I just recently completed some emergency response training with the Fresno Fire Department, and I rolled her over very carefully, because being her elderly age, I know that she has a potential to be very fragile, and you also don't want to upset her if she was still conscious. Rolling her over, I did notice that she was unconscious, and then I also noticed that there was a large amount of blood coming out of her nostrils, so I wasn't exactly quite sure. I waved over a bystander and told him to get the paramedics on the line, and he put the 911 person on speakerphone, and it's always the same thing. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, I'm here in San Diego airport. I have this elderly woman. She passed out right in front of me. She's got a bloody nose. She's unconscious. She had relatively normal blood pressure. But I didn't know this woman. I didn't know she had family nearby or what was going on. And so the 911 person's like, "Oh, please remain calm, sir. Help is on its way." It's like, well, kind of hard to remain calm in that kind of a situation, especially you don't know the person, and you're not technically a licensed medical field individual at the time. So that's also one of the problems associated with the emergency medicine field, is how to keep the person on the phone calm during each call, as well as correlate the response of emergency services, police, fire, EMS, etc. Anyway, the paramedics show up. I told them what happened. The security officer, I guess, came over, and I gave him a statement, and he said that everything checked out and I didn't do anything wrong. Thank goodness I didn't want to miss my spring break flight. But after talking with the paramedic, and after they put her on the gurney and we're gonna wheel her out there out of the terminal, he told me that the lady actually passed out from a hypoglycemic reaction, meaning that she had super low blood sugar and her body just couldn't function anymore, so she passed out. And he said if you weren't standing here, if nobody helped her, she would have never been able to get the treatment she needed to survive. So, you know, that was a really cool feeling. But it also, during that time, it made me think of how do these individuals, paramedics, EMTs, firefighters are usually EMT certified, how do they deal with this type of situation on an everyday basis? You know, they go on average 6 to 7 calls a day, and they go blank game face into each call like nothing even happened before that. And I just did some research and I did some studying, and I found out that that's actually one of the biggest factors and one of the biggest turnovers for EMS individuals. Anytime a call gets put into 911, 911 dispatchers are able to correlate the correct unit to that location, and that type of situation can range anywhere from a car accident to a homicide to gunshot wounds, a knife wound, officer down, mass casualty. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a 50-car pileup that I had the privilege of talking with the Fresno fire captain that responded to that call, and he was telling me how it was mind-boggling to see the twisted metal and the bodies laying all over the place and people trying to get out of their car, but they really couldn't because they were pinned in. And he was said it was super hard to remain calm in that situation. And I said that I couldn't even imagine having to do that and having to keep that game face on and be able to make the right call every second while you're on the job. And he goes, that's one of the hardest things that I have to do as a captain. And really diving into some of the results that I did on a study, it shows that EMS, firefighter or EMTs or paramedics again, they on average are 10 times more likely to commit or attempt suicide than your average individual. I did a survey taking 4,000 EMS providers, both in the Central Valley, a couple in the North Valley, and a couple in the South Valley, and I just asked them how many of them actually attempted this. And it was alarming because out of that 4,000 sample, I got a total of 7.2% actually attempted suicide for the first time. And putting that with the FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Response Agency, putting that with their database and looking at their data records, that meant that EMS providers are actually 10 to 15 times more likely to commit suicide than an everyday individual. And that is one of the highest reasons why the turnover rate for EMS providers is so high. And that's why we're having to constantly retrain and get evaluated. All of our firefighters, all of our paramedics, and all of our EMTs here in Fresno County. UCSF is actually in charge of that reevaluation. And then also, I figured that what they see on the job cannot just be the reason that they are going after a suicide attempt or attempting a suicide. What I actually found out was stress had a lot to do with that too. You know, obviously you have a high amount of stress when you're dealing with a call that has a gunshot wound, or a child is choking, or a child is unconscious. A couple fire captains that I also talked to from Clovis and Fresno said that they responded to 10 calls over this previous summer where a child under the age of 10 drowned. And out of those 10 calls that they did, 4 of them, the child was not able to be revived. And so having to deal with that is extremely tough. The mental stress on you is without a doubt one of the hardest things you can deal with and cope with. American Ambulance is the main ambulance company in our area, and they said that they have on-site counseling at their facilities that allows their providers, their paramedics, EMTs to go in and talk to a social worker or a psychiatrist after each of their shifts in order to get that coping or stress relief that they really need. And then I also asked they call them chiefs at American Ambulance, another big reason that the suicide rate is so high, or why the stress level is so high. And much like any job in America or in the world, the answer was pay. Your average EMT makes about $15 an hour. That is the national average. Here in the state of California, especially our area, the Central Valley, is actually $14.75 is usually what paramedics or EMTs start at. And then your paramedic, they have to go through a little bit more training. It's actually about 1,000-hour to 800-hour course in order to be a licensed paramedic. And they actually require, or they actually gain a wage of, on average, about $20 to $22 an hour. And that's pretty substantial, but still looking at it, that means that the salary for EMT is a little bit under $32,000 a year is what American Ambulance predicted for our area. And for a paramedic, the salary was just under $54,000 according to the data that I was able to collect and really calculate and dive into. And that salary, that's okay, is how I would put it for our area. However, if you look at housing markets in our area, you want to live in a nicer area like Clovis or some of the other parts of Fresno that are upcoming or already really well developed. A salary of just under $50,000 or just above $50,000 is not really going to cut it. And with that, especially if you add kids or a spouse in the process, then yes, you have 2 incomes probably associated with that. However, you're still not really financially comfortable. I talked to 5 paramedics who said that they had to live paycheck to paycheck. Their kids wanted to play sports or do some off-campus activities, but they couldn't afford, so they had to think of ways to tell their children that they couldn't. And I thought that was really sad, because that means that individual who works a 12 to 24-hour shift, paramedics, EMTs, fire, they usually work 12 or 48 hours, or 12 or 24-hour shifts. They're required to do 48 hours every week. But that means that individual is forced to make tough financial decisions when the majority of their week isn't even spent at their house. And that is something extremely sad, and I really advocate on behalf of the EMS community. That's the field that I want to go into, that's the field that I do all my research in, that's the field that I intern in, and that I feel is unfair to have a person who works those long hours to make so little, and that would be forced to live almost paycheck to paycheck. For that reason, that is why I chose to do my TED Talk on this project, and chose to take a really deep look into what makes the EMS community really thrive, and what has that high risk of suicide, why the high risk of suicide can be easily prevented in this type of work environment, or why it's alarming that our EMS community is dealing with these mental problems such as PTSD so much higher than our everyday population. It was estimated that, according to recent data that I collected, that the PTSD associated with the EMS field is almost as high or almost equal to the PTSD of soldiers coming back from Afghanistan. And I know those are two completely different situations, but for those two to be almost equivalent just goes to show that there's something wrong in our society or in our system that we could make a whole lot better. And that is why I think that by just raising pay or getting EMS providers the help they need, we can take that suicide rate and bring it down well below the national average to hopefully benefit the families and the first responders themselves. Thank you.